Welcome to Inside the Chamber. I'm Nikki Anderson, the President and CEO of the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce. Today we're thrilled to be interviewing Doug Lipp. He is the author of Disney U and also part of the team that created Disney University in Tokyo, Japan. Doug travels all over the world, sharing the lessons that he learned from Disney U, and today we have the opportunity to learn those lessons. So what I'd like to talk about is how your journey took you to Disney, what that story is.
I'd like to say it was planning, but it was luck. Yeah. I had a professor in college that knew Van France, the founder of the Disney University, and I had to do an internship for a semester. And she said, "You're interested in leadership? Do you want to go work at the Disney University for a semester? You're going to have to cut your hair and shave off your beard." And I said, "I'm in." So it was just being in the right place at the right time and coming into contact with a culture that resonated with me.
That's awesome. So when you got there, was the magic, like, were you in it right away? That, you know, we'd hear about the magic of Disney. Were you bought in right away, or did it really take time for you to kind of acclimate and get it?
Interesting question. There's two ways to look at this. One, when I was an intern, not being paid, and I was just bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and enthralled. So absolutely, the magic was there. And then after I went to grad school for several years in Japan, I came back as a full-time employee. And it was even more powerful because now I was part of the club. When I was an intern, I was still, this little kid running around, but I got to see these brilliant people. It was a program that Van put together for small companies to help them with their employment and their onboarding. And it was like, God, he's reaching out to small companies. How does he do that? And then when I came in as an employee and got to peek behind the curtain a little bit, it was even more enthralling.
So I know you talked a lot today at your presentation about culture and the importance of culture. You've shared some stories about your experience when you went over to Japan and opened up the Disney World in Tokyo, is that correct?
Yeah.
So talk about a shift in culture. So if there's maybe a story or two that you could share about either what you learned or what you were surprised about when you went over, because certainly you can't take the magic of Disney and stamp it, as you alluded to, in Japan, the way that you might have done from Florida to California.
Well, yeah, that's an interesting question, because we were dealing with our first international theme park with linguistic challenges, cultural challenges, so it was ripe for all kinds of miscommunication. And so one of the first things we did was we said, we're going to bring the Japanese to California and Florida who are going to run this park. We're going to have them run the park in the US and Florida for 6 to 18 months each. So all the main operators came over, and we were right with them side by side. We worked every single attraction together, day shift, night shift, admin, food and beverage, everything. So they saw from A to Z the entire operation, and when they went back to Japan, they became the standard bearer for the organization. We didn't have to go over and start laying on a bunch of rules and regulations. The Japanese became the actual cheerleaders of the culture that they had learned over time in their training, both in California and in Japan. So the lesson to me, Nikki, was preparation, 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 and if it's worth training, spend the money on it, because all too often I have organizations that will say, well, what if I invest training dollars in that employee and they don't stay? And I'll say, well, what if you don't train them and they remain?
Yeah, and they do stay. Yeah.
So we spent the money and the time and the energy to train the Japanese, and we learned from them in that process. So it was a long process, but it set the foundation for moving rapidly once we were in the country.
Yeah, I'm sure the experience was fascinating. So in that same vein, you're a messenger with how to run a great business through your experience with Disney. What inspired you to take that message not only through speaking to people, but writing your book?
Well, the Disney U book I wrote, frankly, Nikki, as a tribute to my mentor, Van France, who was handpicked by Walt Disney to start the university. And so many organizations now send their employees to something called the Disney Institute, which is a wonderful organization. It's an offshoot of Disney University. And nowhere did I see Van getting his due. And so I thought, you know what, I learned so many lessons from him, I know others can as well. So it was just a matter of dipping back into that group of people that worked with Van, asking them for examples of lessons they learned from him. And what has enabled me to do was get re-energized by that culture that I saw as a college intern, and sharing that with audiences around the world.
So you have me very intrigued with this man, Van. Can you give me a little bit of background about him? And I mean, if Walt picked him, or I would say Mr. Disney, if he was sitting there. If he
Actually, he would go by Walt, because if you said Mr. Disney, he'd say, that's my dad, I'm Walt.
Yeah, isn't that cute? So where did Van come from? Like, why was he the guy?
Van was approached by one of the operating vice presidents who knew him from his time working in factories during World War II. And he knew that Walt was creating something called Disneyland, which was going to be as complicated as any factory in the world. And he also knew that Van had that creative streak just like Walt Disney. In fact, if I look at training materials that Van created in the 1940s, well before Disneyland opened in 1955, he used cartoons, jokes, and gags just like Walt did. And Walt said, we will at any time possible use gags to entertain, and laughter is no enemy to learning. And so there was I think a cosmic connection between Van and Walt, who knew, yeah, the bottom line's important, running a factory is massively complicated, and we can have fun at the same time. So Van actually came into Disneyland mid-career. He was in his early 40s when he started.
That's fascinating. I need to Wikipedia him or something, because, and of course your book does a wonderful job of honoring him. So the next question that I have is about the experience. I've been to Disney a couple of times with my children, and it's an experience you never forget, and you look forward to going back. There's all this talk now about, businesses have to offer an experience. I believe that Walt Disney was ahead of his time. Would you agree with that as you look at businesses and the challenges perhaps that they're going through as we move into this next generation of businesses? Do you think it truly is the experience? Is that something that businesses need to embrace? Or is it, cheese and chalk, it's Disney versus a business? Or where do you see the parallels?
At the meta level, I think what Walt was a master at doing was understanding his audience. So I think instead of saying it's about the experience, because that is so relative, is what is the experience that will resonate with your staff or your employees or your patients or whomever. Walt was a master at dipping into that audience and knowing what would resonate with them. So Disneyland, yes, was an experience based on Walt's own experience going to a little show or a little park with his daughters and not being enthralled at all, and literally sitting on a park bench thinking, gosh, the experience could be so much better for a dad and his daughters. If that works with me, I'm guessing it'll work with other people. So he did a lot of research and realized that, yeah, Disneyland could be something that has never occurred elsewhere. So yes, it was the experience, but it was the right experience. All too often I see organizations that try to latch on or hitch their wagon to the phrase of the month or the year or the decade, and they go in the wrong direction with it.
One of the things that you said that really resonated with me is that, it can be beautiful on the outside, but if the inside doesn't have heart and soul, you got nothing.
Exactly.
So can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Well, Walt knew that building the facade like in a Hollywood studio is only as good as 3 or 4 months of shooting a movie, and when building Disneyland, it was going to be a perpetual show, and it was going to evolve. In fact, Walt's admonition at the opening of Disneyland is never going to be complete. So he set the stage for, we're going to always improve and make it better, and the only way we can improve is if we're solid as a team. So in building Disneyland and making the foundation for Disneyland, he also set in place a number of values upon which everybody could rest and say, yeah, that's not going to change, despite the need for the facade to always change, and guests are always changing and their needs are changing, but we have this rock solid facade upon which we can say, yeah, we're going to rest here.
That's awesome. I guess that goes with the quote with that, owners and executives will come and go, but the heart of Walt Disney will always be here.
And that's Van's quote. He said, yes, owners will come and go, but Van's dream and his values will stay alive. And that's really the genesis of the Disney University was Van, again, saw Walt's needs, so experience, getting back to your comment,
Right.
and Van said, how do we keep these values alive? And he knew that the Disney University was more than a training opportunity. It was a vehicle by which the culture would be brought to life. And there's a great quote from another one of the directors that I interviewed for Disney U. He said, unfortunately, many companies think of training as a car wash through which you send employees and they emerge all sparkly and you never send them through again. He said, Disney University is not a car wash, it's a process.
All these things I'm storing away for my next staff meeting. The other thing that you showed early on in your presentation were forgive me, either 4 or 5, the show.
Right. The 4 keys.
The 4 keys.
Yeah.
Can you
Safety,
share those?
courtesy, show, capacity.
And those were established a long time ago, and they still hold
They're still
true
in
today.
place. Safety is number 1 for employees and guests, cast members and guests. Then comes courtesy. Are you friendly? Are you engaged? Eye contact. Safety, courtesy, show how does the physical plant look, both on stage where guests are and also break rooms, because that shows respect for your employees. And the least important is capacity or efficiency. How many people through the rides, through the restaurants, through the stores where you make your money. And Van France, the founder of the university, and his founding team said, if we take care of safety, courtesy, and show, by golly, capacity and efficiency will happen. We'll have loyal guests and we'll have loyal employees. All too often I see organizations turning that upside down and going for the numbers first and losing employees and losing customers and constantly backfilling those.
Is that part of what you were talking about, the foundation that can be quicksand if you don't have those pieces in place?
There is that, and there's also, for example, when Walt would say, we are not going to allow the outside world to come in. And so literally he built a berm around Disneyland, an earthen mound, and they did not allow buildings outside. The Anaheim city didn't allow buildings to grow to a certain height that would then look into the park and encroach. So it goes well beyond those tactics of safety, courtesy, show, capacity. It's what is that experience going to be, and how do we get the support of the community, whether it's the city, whether it's the chamber, or our employees.
And so what tends to be the obstacle when that thought process comes? You know, how are we going to get people involved? Is it leadership? Do you think that prohibits the opportunity to bring people in?
It's clarity of message.
Okay.
Yeah, it's crystal clear priorities. And when you have the idea as a leader, but you don't elucidate those, or you elucidate those and then they change by the month or by whoever has got your ear. And so again, Walt said, I am not going to make a movie to appeal to the critics. I'm appealing to moms and dads and their kids. And if I upset a few critics, so be it. And he took his leadership to the same way. He knew that leadership was not a popularity contest.
So it's about knowing your audience and what they want.
Knowing your audience, knowing what they want, and then going after them with a vengeance.
Awesome. Well, we're going to continue this in just a moment. We'll be right back and talk to Doug Lipp about customer care.
Naperville Bank and Trust has the expertise, knowledge, and experience to help you reach your business goals.
We would prefer to work with somebody like Naperville Bank and Trust. They're engaged in the community, they're able to help meet our financial needs, they understand us as a business.
They provide all the tools that you would ask that we as a growing business need of a bank. Most importantly, to me, it's a great personal relationship we have with Tom and John and our bankers.
It was the best thing we could have done in banking. Banking can be very cold. What the bank brings to us is that warm feeling when you come into the bank and people say, "Hi, Greg."
It's about being part of the community again, about being a name again, about having credit for who your business is instead of just being a number.
Naperville Bank and Trust. Bring it home.
So Doug, you talked earlier a little bit about Walt Disney's ability to deliver, because he really knew what his audience wanted.
Right.
I see with companies all the time, the mistake that they make is, I'm going to give them what I think they want.
Right.
But it was clear that Walt Disney gave them what they wanted.
Right.
How did he gather that information to have a clear understanding about what his audience or what those families really needed?
Well, there's really 2 answers to that. In one aspect, before he built Disneyland and he was simply making films, I would posit that he had a vision and he went after it. Much like Steve Jobs with the iPhone. None of us knew that we needed the iPhone until it came out. And Walt was good in that he knew that family entertainment was lacking, and so he was adamant that it was going to get out there. So I would say that in the film side of his business, he didn't really spend a lot of time analyzing the audience. He just had an innate feel. That's where his genius came through. Now you move into 1955 when Disneyland opened. He loved Disneyland because it was a never-ending experiment. And he said Disneyland is never going to be complete. So he actually spent more time understanding the guests and the employees at Disneyland than he did an audience in a movie theater, because he wanted to tinker with it and have the employees stay, and he wanted the guests to return. And he knew that the only way to build out Disneyland on a regular basis was for he himself to go into the park, walk the park, and gather information firsthand.
Well, I think that's where I see companies not getting it, is that it truly is about that customer experience
Right.
and walking away with that feeling of joy. Or,
Right.
So you told so many stories at your presentation, one that had many of us without dry eyes. Can you share maybe one of the stories that really show the value of the vision of Walt Disney and the importance of staff caring and being passionate about the people that come through the gates every single day? Because I personally am passionate about customer care. I
Right.
know that it can make or break your business.
Right.
You guys seem to do it effortlessly.
Right.
So is there an example you can share, whether it's a story about something that happened or something that goes on at Disney U?
Well, I told the story of how Walt, before Disneyland opened, would take his engineers and the architects and executives into the park, and on a number of occasions he would have them kneel down and look at the park from the perspective of a child. And they, meaning the architects, hadn't thought about this when they designed the height of the windowsills on Main Street, or the angle of which you viewed things as a 6-foot person versus as a 4-foot person. And Walt was brilliant in that he had people looking at the design from the perspective of the child as well as the adult. And that goes back to his experience with his daughters in that little park, where he was saying, I can make this a better experience. So I think that is really what sets the stage for everything that you see at any Disney theme park, or the education strategies at Disney University, is understand the needs of the recipient. Sometimes you've got to go toe-to-toe with them and let them know that they're probably misplaced, and sometimes it means that you have to capitulate as a service provider and change your approach. There's got to be a happy medium somewhere.
So let's talk about the shift in customer.
Sure.
Right? You've been in this world for a long time. What's been the biggest shift? And I think you mentioned at one point about, this wasn't the term that you used, but
Right.
I always say adapt or die.
Sure.
So when you see the industry 40 years ago and fast forward now, I mean, I think about my kids, and even when we went, many years ago, technology was just coming in to
Right.
play. So what have you seen as the biggest shift, and perhaps maybe the biggest challenge that Disney has identified but managed to, move forward with and continue to bring in satisfied customers?
It depends on the era. Every era has its biggest shift. And so I would suggest that the ability of a leader to adapt her or his style is the biggest challenge. You can blame technology, you can blame millennials, you can blame that culture or that organization or government regulations. Everybody has their biggest. What I see as the biggest issue is the leaders that stick their head in the sand and say, back then in those days it was better, and they refuse to adjust. I'll give you an example. One of my mentors, a guy named Jim Cora, was one of the founding members of Disney U. He was handpicked by Walt because he saw Walt in the park one day. He was walking to the Matterhorn. He was a trainer, Jim. And Walt said, what are you doing with all those books? And Jim said, I want to improve our training at Disneyland. It's word of mouth right now. And we've grown beyond just this nice little family of where the senior operator can tell the new hire how to run the park. We've got to have systems in place. So whether those systems are in training, or they are in manuals that are handwritten, or they are on the internet, he, meaning Jim, saw the need to take it beyond this familial, pat on the back, you know how to run the park, to let's put systems in place. So he helped drag the company from the days of just a pat on the back to something new. And it had nothing to do with technology. It was just size and growth. And what are we going to do with that?
Yeah. And I think that's a common mistake too, is that we can easily blame things, but at the end of the day, it's on the leadership's ability to identify and adapt.
Right.
What do you love most about what you do? I see how you engage with your audience, and it's impactful for me because, I mean, you're demonstrating leadership on the stage. So I'm curious as to what is it that you love about what you do?
It's sharing ideas and seeing light bulbs in both recipients, and then when I'm in a workshop and they challenge ideas and we have back and forth, light bulbs go off in me. So it's constantly expanding your brain and trying new things. So whether I'm challenging a recipient or a trainee or they're challenging me, it's not getting stuck in a rut. And it goes back, I think, to what I learned at Disneyland that Walt challenged his team is never rest on your laurels. In fact, at the 10th anniversary of Disneyland, he said, I look at the first 10 years of Disneyland, this is in 1965, tremendously successful, but he says, I look at it as nothing more than a dress rehearsal. And if any of you want to rest on your laurels, there's the door, get out. So it's constantly challenging oneself to improve and expand.
So do you have a favorite story or one of those experiences, whether it was when you were opening Tokyo or when you were an intern, that you'll never forget, that has probably impacted you not only from a business perspective but even a personal perspective?
Yeah, how I was trained by Van when I was a new hire. Now I'm paid, I'm on the payroll, and I arrived at a staff meeting 2 minutes late. I walked across the park and I was enthralled with looking at all the pretty lights and looking at guests having a good time, and I got to the meeting room and the door was shut. And so I asked the admin assistant, have they changed where the meeting is or the time? And she says, no, it's going on right now. I said, well, the door's locked. She said, yeah. What time was it supposed to start? And I said, 9 o'clock. She says, what time is it now? I said, 9:02. Yeah, I suggest you wait there until Van comes out. He'll have a word with you. And an hour later, the door opened and everybody came out and Van said, so, you going to be late next time?
Wow.
I said no. So I learned a powerful lesson. No voices were raised, but expectations were absolutely crystal clear.
Well, you mentioned something in your workshop about Walt Disney ruling with an iron fist but knowing when to put on the velvet glove.
Precisely.
Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, the story that I share in Disney U was this childhood star, a guy named Kevin Corcoran, who was in Old Yeller, and he talked about how when Walt was talking to him about some challenges that Kevin was having memorizing his lines, Kevin divulged to Walt, well, my dad just passed away. So here's a 9-year-old boy who was a rock star of his era. And he said Walt was, yes, he was tough as nails and he didn't let us get egotistical, but he also knew when to pat you on the back and give you a hug. And Walt said, Kevin, do you need more time? Or are you still having fun because we don't have to do this anymore? And Kevin said, Walt, give me a week. And that trust in each other. So yes, Walt did not allow anybody other than himself to be the star. Disneyland cast members, they're not the star, they're part of the cast. That's why they're called cast members. So if you want to be the star of the show, go work elsewhere. But Walt also knew how to create that culture where we take care of each other.
And that builds trust, which you have talked about how important
Trust,
trust is.
absent trust, nothing else works.
So tell me a little bit for our viewers about your 4 pillars. I think it was innovate, educate.
Well, it's not my 4 pillars, it's what Van identified as
Right.
the 4 pillars that Walt exuded, and it was innovate, so constantly take risks, leadership support, getting out and walking the park and seeing what's going on a regular basis with employees and customers. So innovate, support, educate, the importance of constantly exposing ourselves to new ideas and stretching our boundaries, and then entertain. Let's have fun while we're doing it. And it doesn't mean just laughing and cracking jokes. It means if you're engaged and entertaining each other, meaning we've reduced our stress levels, we're going to absorb more ideas. So it can happen in groups of PhD scientists or frontline employees at a fast serve restaurant. If it's an engaging environment, people are going to learn more. So innovate, support, educate, entertain are the 4 pillars upon which Van saw Walt build his movie industry, and he used those to build Disneyland.
Fascinating. So Disney U is kind of your homage, if you will, to Van. Can you give us a little bit, so that if viewers that are watching might not have the book, a little bit of what's inside there and why you're proud of it?
Well, it's full of interviews of men and women that helped start the company, that work directly with Walt, and they share leadership examples of success, of failure. each chapter, I have 13 chapters. I call them lessons because 13 was Walt's favorite number, so I was bound and determined to write 13 lessons. And each lesson starts with a story, and it ends, each chapter ends with not only the takeaways, but as a trainer, and what I learned from Van is, let's not just learn, but let's do something with it. So each chapter ends with, how do you make this come to life in your own organization? And if you're not doing it, what's your excuse for not doing so? It's full of anecdotes, full of quotes, real-time stories of success, and some challenges that absolutely any organization can use.
Fabulous. I know that you talked, and I mentioned this earlier, about the importance of trust, but also attitude. I'm a big believer that attitude and gratitude really goes a long way in the health and maybe optimism of a business.
Sure.
Was that a big part of it, that attitude?
Yeah. Having the right people on board. So one of the things I mentioned in the keynote was hire right, train right, and treat right. So hiring the right people, and Disney spends a tremendous amount of money through the proper interview process, behavior-based interviewing. A lot of great organizations do this, that make sure that the people that they're hiring have that right substrate, they have the right attitude, and then they can always be taught the skills later on. And if you try to turn that upside down and just hire the skills, but the person doesn't have the right attitude, sooner or later they're going to drag down an entire organization.
And I think we've probably all experienced walking into a business and seeing somebody with a bad attitude, and you walk out and never to return again.
One or two people holding an organization hostage because they are prime producers and the company hasn't built backups, and so they're being held over a barrel.
Yeah. So tell me what's next for you. Are you working on another book? I know you're all over lecturing and inspiring and educating. Anything that you might want us to know about what you're doing?
Yes, in fact, I've been working with my wife, who's my business partner. She's the chief operating officer of my company, and a great journalist said that she is the Geppetto to my Pinocchio. So she's the brains behind the dancing fool that I am on stage. We've just completed an online training program that we're sending. We're making it live next week, and we have a business that we started with a partner of ours, and the goal is to spread the word even more than I can physically do in traveling 300 days out of the year, but just to get the word out there even more. And the idea that Van France and Walt Disney have created such a tremendous opportunity for so many people to learn, and it's not that difficult if you apply the basics.
It's all about applying it, right?
Applying it, yes.
That's key. So speaking of application,
sure.
We knew when we were looking for our next speaker for the speaker series what we were looking for, and you fit the bill so well. Were you surprised as a Chamber of Commerce reaching out to you? What has that experience been like?
Well, I was going to hold back, but Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce was tremendous. I had a seamless experience. It's still a seamless experience right now, and I've had experience with other chambers, and you put other, not just chambers, but so many organizations that are in the space of putting on conferences professionally, you put them to shame, because the preparation you allowed, the time you spent with me beforehand, the day of this facility, and the way that you handled the guests, you got them in their seats, you got them moved from point A to point B, so operational basics were taken care of seamlessly. So many organizations are good at marketing, but then the day of turns into a circus, and you nailed the preparation, the marketing, the day of, in interacting with a lot of the guests. They've had nothing but positive things to say, and I think other chambers could learn a lot from you.
Well, thank you. It's what you shared with us, is that you can be all sparkly on the front, but if there's not heart and soul, and
exactly.
We were certainly excited and looking forward to your presentation. And Doug, we can't thank you enough for being with us.
It's been a real joy, Nikki. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm humbled that you asked me.
Thank you for joining us for Inside the Chamber. I hope that you found the interview with Doug Lipp inspiring. If you'd like to learn more, you can pick up his book, Disney U. Next time you think about shopping, dining, or looking for a service, I hope that you will think about the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce. I'm Nikki Anderson. Have a great day.